One of the issues that we take very seriously and we're beginning to explore is the issue that came up earlier this evening around attitude change. Mm-hmm. Again, we're not going to solve this problem with a bunch of really smart people coming up with technical solutions. This is going to have to be addressed as a community in partnership with our neighbors. And so the Climate Readiness Institute is now beginning to discuss with journalists, with social scientists, how we bring best practices that have been learned around issues of public health to solving the climate issue. I mean, I'm happy to say that in this country, we've gone from a situation where smoking was very common to now where it's really frowned upon incorrectly. We want to take the same strategies that worked around issues of public health and around diet. I mean, compare and contrast what we have now in our grocery stores to what we grew up on. Mm-hmm. That's another example of a success story. We want to bring those practices to bear on climate change. And that was, in large part, succeeded because we communicated to people that their children's health and their grandchildren's health critically depended on changing the way that they behaved. And I think we can succeed again.
Okay, there's another element that you mentioned earlier, and that's the issue of climate equity. Mm-hmm. So we do have an image that we'd like to show. Mm-hmm. So you could tell me what we're seeing here and the disproportionate effect of all of these issues on more impoverished communities.
Well, the Bay Area is fortunate to have 7 million people living in it. And the challenge that we face is that the solutions that we pursue really need to work for all of the 7 million people. This cannot be one where there are a few winners and a lot of losers. The picture that's shown here is an issue that has faced us because of historical habitation patterns in the Bay Area, where some of the ports grew up on labor, fairly poorly paid labor, that's now stayed in place around those ports. Those ports happen to be at sea level. So the people who are living next to those ports are at ground zero for the effects of sea level rise. They are some of the people who are least able to pick up sticks and move. And so the solutions that we come up with have to address this issue of an historical inequity where that labor built the Bay into what we have now, brought us much of the prosperity, but we cannot leave them behind to then literally be inundated by the consequences of that prosperity.
So what do we do?
We have to figure out solutions for climate change and for mitigating climate change and for adaptation that bring co-benefits to everyone. And to give you an example, let's talk about carbon dioxide for a second. Okay. That's the chief culprit in this whole climate change issue. And by the way, the carbon dioxide level in this room is elevated well above ambient levels right now because we have a lot of very, very smart, dedicated people in this room thinking about climate change. But you've elevated the carbon dioxide in this room to probably a couple of hundred parts per million above ambient at this point. Mm-hmm. If I were to take it back to ambient levels, none of you would be the wiser because you can't taste it, you can't smell it, you can't see it. But what if I did that at the same time as bring you greener parks, better transportation, so that if you're juggling 2 jobs to try to make enough money to raise your family to a higher standard than you had as a child, you had a decent transportation system, made sure that your kids' schools were much greener. That's a co-benefit. Mm-hmm. And we have to make sure that the measures that we bring to bear on climate change are part of a system that brings in co-benefits so that people can see immediate tangible benefits to their own lives, to their families' lives, at the same time as we solve these larger issues. And that's something we've been thinking about hard as part of the Climate Readiness Institute.
Okay, so that would be the Climate Readiness Institute is one component, but when you think about the larger intellectual infrastructure and research infrastructure in the U.S., I mean, are we really aligned properly to meet this problem, or do we need to do some major structural changes in that?
No, we are not aligned properly to deal with this problem. Let me just compare and contrast the amount of money that the U.S. spends, and I don't mean to single out the U.S. on this issue, but the amount of money the U.S. spends on weapons R&D versus climate R&D. Mm-hmm. It's over a factor of 10. So the U.S. spends somewhere in the range of $70 billion a year on weapons research. And if you look at the sum total spent on climate, it's just around 6. It's a factor of 10. So writ large, at the level of the nation, we're not spending as much, nearly as much as we should. We should be looking at this as if this is a Manhattan project, but a Manhattan project with a worthy outcome, and one that's going to take a century to play out. But we need to be dedicating resources to it as if it's that scale of challenge.
I want to get back to the heat wave example just for a second, because I think what we might see when we're talking about climate equity is the possibility that in substandard housing, that's also sometimes an issue, like there was in France, massive heat waves, there could be people dying as a result of that, and that would be disproportionately happening in these underprivileged areas is what I'm assuming. So the slide that we're showing now is, I think, projected heat wave possibilities in the Bay Area in the years ahead. So this is a serious threat, I would assume, at this point.
Yes, it is a serious threat, and this is one where the climate models are in complete agreement about what's going to happen. There's really no ambiguity. The only ambiguity is that most of the climate change we're going to see between now and 2040 is already in the pipeline. What happens after 2040 is really something where we have a major choice about which path we follow. If we choose to follow business as usual pathway, we're going to be looking at a situation where the southern part of the United States is experiencing permanent, perpetual heat waves every summer. That would be a serious threat to human health. This is an extremely robust prediction. This, by the way, affects not only the United States, it affects China. So the Berkeley lab has taken this result and shown it to the previous premier in China. It affects the whole Mediterranean area in Europe. It affects the whole Northern Hemisphere. So this is an issue that we have to face squarely, because it will be, and again, we're sort of framing this in a human context, but we also have to think about the implications of this for ecosystems. We've sort of punched the accelerator in terms of how rapidly ecosystems have to change to meet a very different thermal environment. And some of them can't change fast enough. So this is a situation where, we keep putting this in a human lens, but humans, we cohabit this planet with a really remarkable diversity of life, and we have to be mindful of the fact that we're stressing them out as well.
This is the web of life that you mentioned earlier.
Yes.
So the adaptation, when we hear that term, we're usually speaking about the human ability to adapt, but not necessarily the other part of the ecosystem which we are destroying by this turn of events. Okay, I think we're going to end the segment now to